So hi y'all, my name is Melina Abdullah. I'm an organizer with Black Lives Matter, and this is our 12th episode of This Is Not a Drill. This is a series that we initiated when we became aware of the coronavirus pandemic and wanted to have particular responses for Black people. And so we began kind of talking about things like, is coronavirus real? We began talking about things like how do you make sure you can file for unemployment? How do we save Black businesses? We talked about those things, and then something else we talked about is the erosion of rights in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic, the rolling back of rights. What we were very clear on is that now more than ever, we have to exercise our voice. We have to engage in ongoing protest. And so on tonight's edition of This Is Not a Drill, we have three of the most powerful organizers on the planet, three of my favorite people on the planet, and we're going to be talking about the power of protest with Black Lives Matter co-founder. I know on the flyer it just says co-founder. That means she's the co-founder of everything, I think. Patrisse Cullors is joining us, along with a little brother from another mother, Kendrick Sampson, who is an actor and a hell of an activist and organizer. He has his own organization called BldPwr, but Black Lives Matter is his home. He gets down with us and has been getting down with us for the last 5 years. So welcome, Kendrick Sampson. And then lastly, we have Joseph Williams, who renamed you? Jan renamed you JoJo. Y'all can't call him that, but I can call him that, right? Who is one of the action team organizers. That's like the leadership team for Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. He is a lot of the energetic force of the largest chapter of the Black Lives Matter network. He's also an organizer with the Schools LA Students Deserve. So as we talk about the power of protest, we want JoJo to talk specifically about the way in which young people, and by young people I mean children, I'm always weirded out when 30-something-year-olds call themselves young people, right? We're talking about real young people, like teenagers younger, who are doing tremendous work through organizing and protest. We also want to enter this caveat that we recognize that protest is but one piece of organizing, but it's a powerful piece. And so we want to lift that up in this moment. And so I hope that this will be more of a conversation, but we recognize that Patrisse is also a mother and is also a community member and has lots on her plate and is only going to be able to be with us for a portion of the show. So we're going to begin with Patrisse and ask Patrisse Cullors to talk a little bit about the birth of Black Lives Matter and how she was already an organizer. Black Lives Matter didn't make her. How she conceived of this movement to build, well, we called it a movement, not a moment. How did you conceive of Black Lives Matter? And can you give us that origin story, the brief version?
Sure. Thanks, Melina. Thanks, BLMLA, and all the amazing work that y'all do. One of the first chapters of Black Lives Matter 7 years ago, before we became a household name. Patrisse Cullors, born and raised in Los Angeles, and the birth of Black Lives Matter really starts with the love for Black people. Alicia Garza wrote a love note to Black folks in response to the issues of state violence and vigilante violence. George Zimmerman, who was a murderer of Trayvon Martin, was acquitted. And in that acquittal, many of us were outraged, disturbed, and we were even more disturbed given that we were being placated by white folks in particular, that we had a Black president. We should be happy and we shouldn't be complaining, and racism was over. But we knew that that was so not the truth. And when Alicia wrote Black Lives Matter, I put a hashtag in front of it. I made a request to her, hey, do you want to build this thing out? Let's make it big. Let's grow a movement. And on July 13th, on July 13th, 2013, we started Black Lives Matter, and it was a really important intervention. And it was a really important intervention in what is like a larger conversation around the civil and human rights of Black people. And 7 years later, we're back in the streets, and I think for so many of us, the call for Black Lives Matter really impacted our spirits, and it made us motivated to be in the streets and to create change. And now, with that call of Black Lives Matter, we have another call to defund the police. And I think that call has really shaken people. And when you feel nervous about something or scared about something, that's usually a really good sign, because it means that you haven't allowed yourself to imagine a new world. And that's what Black Lives Matter is about. We're about imagining new worlds where Black people can actually be free.
I'm talking with the mute, with the mic muted. Just for clarity's sake, yes, we're in the streets in the tens of thousands, but we also never left the streets, right? So on July 13th, 2013, that was a boiling point where thousands upon thousands of us in Los Angeles and around the country poured out in the streets in the name of Trayvon Martin. But since Trayvon Martin, there have been thousands of Black people killed by police, and we go out into the streets every single time. And so what we're seeing is kind of a renaissance of that. But the movement never died. It never went away. We've been out every single week, multiple times, since July 13th, 2013. Is that right?
That's right. Literally, that's right.
Thank you. And I also want to lift up sometimes one of the calls. The call is often justice for, and then whoever's name is hashtagged. One of the things I've had to reorient myself on is that we cannot get justice for George Floyd, because justice would mean that he's still here. But we can get justice in his name, and we can invoke his spirit to help us struggle for justice. And I hear my nephew in the background, and I always feel like the work that we're doing is really justice for our children. How do you feel about that as a possibility? Do you think that has you becoming a mother relatively recently, like since the birth of Black Lives Matter, has that changed you at all? Has it renewed your sense, not that you ever were not in the movement, right? But has it made you engage in it with increased urgency?
Also talking on mute. Yes. You know, I thought I was, no, let me say this differently. I was always passionate about this work. I was also always felt honored to be a part of movement building work, but it wasn't until I had a child where the urgency of changing this place felt almost like a desperation. Like, if I don't change this, what will happen to my children? And I know you've talked about this a lot, Melina, having 3 kids, living with the terror of not just knowing how vulnerable I am. You know, I feel like I can handle if something happens to me, but if something were to happen to my child, and so whenever, you know, something does happen to someone's child, the agony that I feel for them has everything to do with because of me being a mom, and like looking at my child and not ever imagining anybody harming him. And so this is, you know, no one except for, you know, Black mothers know that kind of agony. And I think it's been so important for me since I had my kid in 2016 to feel really planted in this work and feel like I want to be the most effective organizer that I can ever be, because our lives actually and really depend on it.
I'd love for you to weigh in on it. You're not a dad yet, right? But you do a lot of work with young people. And so, on today's show, we're focusing on the power of protest. And I think that a lot of the work that you do with Students Deserve is about awakening young people to their own power, letting them know that they don't have to submit to the world as they've been handed it. Can you talk about, because sometimes I see you even interacting with my children who are part of the Youth Vanguard, but also part of Students Deserve, and you seem to get a lot of life from the work that you're doing. So beyond what Patrisse is saying around our role as parents, what kind of invigoration, I don't know if that's the right word because I've been going it since 5 o'clock this morning, but I think that's the right word. How does it invigorate you to work with young people? What does that mean?
Oh man. Hey, I mean, it's a blessing to be on with you all, and especially Patrisse, you've been so formative in so much. And I first want to point to, your I guess autobiography, or your book, Patrisse, of When They Call You a Terrorist, which reminds us that this Black Lives Matter movement and the work that you've done before it as well, the organizing work, comes out of things that happened in your childhood, right? And I think that's similar for many folks, myself included, who are really passionate about this work. Comes out of experiences that we had when we were children, really formative experiences with the criminal justice system, or with the police, or with other forms of policing of our bodies, whether from the schools or et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's, again, one of the things that is so inspiring about the Black Lives Matter movement, is that it has helped give language to this new generation, to help them, or to help us rather. I went 7 years ago. I was still in college when Black Lives Matter started, and I remember so clearly how it helped give language to feelings that we have all felt since we were kids, since we were children, from things that we've experienced, that our loved ones have experienced, and are still experiencing in many cases, and that we many times felt so powerless about. And it was and is a movement that not only reminds us that our lives do matter, that we are important, but also reminds us of our power, because Black Lives Matter has also always been associated with uprising, right? With people rebelling against that system, and especially young people. And to see, the number of students, who were in the initial Black Lives Matter uprising. I know, Dr. Abdullah, many of your college students, right, at the time, were involved in the movement. So it has always been a movement that has engulfed and encapsulated young people, and in many ways has been led by young people. And just seeing the way that young people are continuing to gain language from the Black Lives Matter movement, and to push us forward, and to push the work forward in so many ways that 7 years ago didn't even seem possible, is so inspiring. Because, and Kendrick talks about this a lot, about the imagination that we have to have, especially here in LA. And I think kids have it, obviously, right? The system beats it out of us in many ways, but our youth have the imagination to see a world without cops and not question how, right? But just to believe it, and believe that it's necessary and that it will happen. And that is so powerful and refreshing to me. And I think really, again, it's a feature of what our movement has come from and is. You're on mute.
Here we go with the mute again, right? Let's get to what the title of this particular conversation is: the power of protest. We don't, I think, pointing to something, Jojo, that we don't have to accept the world as we've been handed, right? And we've always engaged in protest as part of Black Lives Matter, but also Black Lives Matter is but one organization or one moment. This Black Lives Matter moment is but one spot on the long struggle for Black freedom, right? That we never submitted to the world as we've been handed it. Our people never agreed, never consented to chattel slavery. We always fought it. We never agreed to be lynched in the first wave of lynching. We always fought it. We always fought for civil rights and women's rights and Black power and Black studies. We always fought. And we know that protest isn't everything, but it's a necessary facet of organizing. So I'd love to bring Kendrick into the conversation because the work that we've been doing together, especially over the last 5 years, has included a lot of organizing work, but at the center of that organizing has been protest. And I think that you are just masterful in helping to conceive of the ways in which we engage people in this process of protest. And protest isn't just about showing up on the streets. It's about saying, I will not submit, and taking whatever power we have. So can you talk about why, one, do you agree with that? But also two, why you've been so deeply committed and present to the protest movement?
Do I agree with not submitting? I think, in terms of, I don't agree with compromising with oppression. I don't agree with compromising with Black death. I think that, the way that we are, a lot of the time we take scraps. Like, we have scraps and they make the scraps look a little bit better, and then we think that our job is done, that we've had a win. But yes, we're exhausted, but we're also dying. I had a reporter the other day at one of the marches ask me, do you think people will get tired? And it's like, yeah, we've been tired for a long time. We're gonna be tired regardless. We're gonna be exhausted regardless. Grief is exhausting. Trauma is exhausting. These systems are exhausting. They are literally exhausting our communities. They are extracting until we ain't got no more. But they can't stop us. You know what I'm saying? Like, they came out there on Saturday and tried to intimidate us and shoot us up into submission, and then people was out there the next day. So I think that it is central to, we have to disrupt these systems, and we have to have these public displays so that we show our power in the streets, we show our commitment. And those are the PR, those are, what I would call in Hollywood terms, like the PR moments. Like, that's, when you have the big red carpets and the events and such, that's when everybody sees your power, your presence, right? As opposed to what the work really is, which is what happens every day, these phone calls and texts and ideations and meetings and strategy sessions and relationship developing, list making, community outreach, all of that, that doesn't look as impressive. It's hard to film everybody knocking on doors at one time. It's hard to film people out there with clipboards and shit. That's just not really that exciting or invigorating, and that doesn't get people to show what your power truly is, because that's not what people want to see, to be completely honest. So when we get out there in the streets, that's like, we're showing up, we are willing to pull up, we are willing to put our bodies out there and our bodies on the line. This is how bad we want it. This is how powerful we are. We are willing to make ourselves vulnerable, even though we already are, to attack, in order to stand up for those that we do not want to lose, those that are still living, and to honor those who have been murdered by this system, and continue to be. So I think it's, to keep it short, I think it's really important, because I don't want no more of us to die. You know, I think, you know, I'm fighting too hard for those who are living, and to just have a relationship. Like, if you want to put it in real practical terms, how hard is it just to have a relationship with your nephew or your son or your mom or your uncle or whoever, and really prove to them that you love them, or make them prove that they love you, and like, you know, the way these relationships go and all their nuances, and really deconstructing these relationships and trying to develop good relationships, and deconstructing trauma and figuring out how to communicate and be in healthy relationship, only for somebody to be taken by an oppressive system that claims to want to protect you, to be murdered by those systems. We shouldn't have to navigate our family life and our loved ones, our friends and our community with that terror in place. So I want to fight for a world free of that police terror. And you know, like I keep saying, I'll be damned if one of my nephews or loved ones or nieces are taken by that system.
Okay, so I do want to zero in on a couple of things that you said that I think will move us into this recent protest work. One, that it's important for us to be out in the streets as a show of power, right? And I think over the last, we lost Patrisse. I think over the last couple of weeks, we've been seeing these shows of power, right? We've been seeing people being willing to pour into the streets in the name of George Floyd. And I'd love for us to talk a little bit about how this sends kind of a message to the system, because what's starting to happen now is people are getting nervous. And so you see elected officials and those who have formal power trying to pretend as if, one, that they care about a George Floyd, right? They don't care about George Floyd because Mayor Garcetti can't tell me he cares about George Floyd when he doesn't give a damn about Grashario Mack, right? He can't say he cares about George Floyd when he doesn't give a damn about Waukesha Wilson. He doesn't give a damn about George Floyd when we got fucked up for protesting for Riddell Jones, right? So we see politicians utter names when they think that it will win them political capital, but you even see them moving policy and then pretending that they did it on their own. So I'd love for both of you to kind of first speak to that, and then I have a follow-up question about what it means to be in the streets. But first, speak to this notion, you know, that frame that Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without demand, it never has and it never will. And so the importance of protest and debunking the idea that somehow power conceded something because it just was benevolent, I guess. So either of you.
I mean, I think I mean, it is a farce. It's like some sort of, it's something that Hollywood has a narrative that Hollywood has forced on us as well. Storytelling, a false storytelling device of like the benevolent leader that saw the light and somehow conceded power, conceded or gave away what he benefited from, right? Because for some reason, one day he finally had moral clarity. It's not, it hasn't ever been that. There hasn't ever been a period in history where the oppressor one day woke up and was like, you know what, y'all are right. I'm gonna give all this shit back to you. I didn't mean to do that to you. I apologize. Let me get all the shit that I love, that I stole from y'all asses. I'm gonna give it back. And let's link hands together and sing a song. That just doesn't happen. Every single thing that we have fought for, like even when I go to voting, the voting system has not ever worked for our communities, ever. hasn't ever worked for our communities. Anytime that we've had a win through voting, it's because we hijacked the system. It's because we fought and took over overwhelmingly the system through a movement and got a win, including the power to vote, period. Because a lot of people like to be like, well, Martin Luther King was a Republican or some shit. And it's like, no, Martin Luther King could not vote. He wasn't part of any party. Like, you know, this is not what it was. I don't want anybody to mistake that. So I you know, like Eric Garcetti saying this bullshit about, like, you know, or trying to seem like he's seen the light and giving us, extending an olive branch or whatever, in the same way that some of these police officers are like kneeling with folks, and you know, the First Step Act with Donald Trump. There's all of these that look like, but these are, you know, decades of folks fighting in the vein of our ancestors for centuries, and they have built a movement that we continue and we demand and we fight and we put pressure on and we get numbers and we show our numbers, and then they get scared and then they act, and they don't ever act in the way that we want them to. So then we have to keep fighting. So we can't fool ourselves into thinking that we've won because they've given us better scraps. We need to keep fighting until we get what we need. So one of the reasons that I keep fighting for this defunding police is because I know that those resources belong to our communities, and every cent that they spend on police is a cent that they're taking away from a system that we actually need, like care that we actually need in our communities. And so we can pay for those resources that they say we don't have the funding for. They're just choosing to spend it on oppression as opposed to what we need.
We're still muted, Doc, but I think you might have passed it to me.
Yes, I did.
So definitely, second, you know, everything that Kendrick said, and you know, just building off that, is completely ahistorical, right? Even the way that folks are trying to paint, you know, the way the quote unquote violence of protests, or what folks have labeled riots in some cases, right? And say that this is counterproductive and this will accomplish nothing, and Dr. King, you know, would have never accepted this. First of all, you know, go read more about Dr. King, right? Go read, you know, some different speeches than a little quote that you've seen in a Facebook post or whatever somewhere. And or your, you know, middle school history book either. And secondly, folks literally don't remember that, you know, the Civil Rights Act of 1968, right? That didn't get passed from peaceful protests. After Dr. King was murdered, there were riots, right? There was over a week of riots throughout the country, right? And that's what ultimately convinced lawmakers, after years and years of peaceful protests, to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1968. So literally, when folks are talking about, you know, discrediting the movement or discrediting the rage that folks are feeling right now when they're protesting and when we're going out and demanding justice and saying that this is counterproductive, and that's ahistorical, right? It literally does not recognize the fact that not only does power concede nothing without demand, as you know, Doc quoted the great Frederick Douglass, but there's never been an instance also of people getting their freedom or getting their rights in this country without some level of violence, right? Whether you're talking about the violence of, you know, the many uprisings, right, in this country and many others during the system of chattel slavery, right? Whether you're talking about the violence of John Brown and other white accomplices who tried to start a war to free, you know, with slaves or with enslaved people to end slavery, or whether you're talking about the Civil War, or whether you're talking even about the Civil Rights Movement, that was not a nonviolent movement. Protesters were nonviolent, but there was a lot of violence in that movement. The things we remember about that movement are the violence that was taken out on Dr. King and taken out on so many other protesters in the name of simple things like, can I sit next to you at the lunch counter? Can I please vote? Right? And so when America is talking about this violence of these protesters and these rioters is, unconscionable and it's immoral, right? It completely is erasing this history of violence. And every single moment, even in white people, in regular white folks' liberation, right, from the Kingdom of England, there was a great deal of violence, sometimes about things as simple as attacks on tea, right? And so when folks criticize the violence of this movement and say that it's not constructive or it's harming the movement or it's, anything like that, it really is both using the language and the viewpoint of the oppressor, and it's just blatantly ahistorical and false. And so again, just the importance of folks being in the streets and giving voice to that rage and giving voice to that anger and giving voice to that pain is hugely necessary, right, for any change to come about, right? I mean, we probably all grew up in households where they told us, closed mouths don't get fed. And in this sense, right, we know we're not going to get our justice. They're not going to give us justice without us continuing to demand it.
Yeah, without us taking it, right? We got to
Right.
take our justice.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that you're lifting up actually moves to the second point that I'm getting from both of your comments now, which is not just around this question of violence and what's really been kind of problematic for me in many of the conversations that we've had with media is them completely mislabeling things as violence, right? The violence is that George Floyd was murdered by 4 police officers, right? The violence is that 601 people have been killed in LA County by police since Jackie Lacey took office. That's the violence. The violence was committed on the body of Ryan Twyman and on the body of Eric Rivera and on the body of so many of our people. But what they're talking about is a broken Starbucks window. I don't give a fuck about Starbucks windows. I don't really care about the suit outlet burning, right? I would say more, but we're on Facebook Live, but there's some other shit I don't really care about, right? That I should, let me stop because I'm really tempted to say what those things are, right? But I think that it's also important to remember for those who come out to protest, like the fantastic, beautiful, powerful protest that we had yesterday and the one that we had the day before that and the one that we had the Saturday before that, getting 50,000 people into the streets, like Kendrick said, is like a red carpet moment. But you got to understand that there are also costs. So I know all of us have been targeted. All of us have received threats. But we talk about violence. I want to go to you, Kendrick, because at that Saturday protest, which you made beautiful speeches, you helped to organize, you brought people in, the police moved in with such violence. And there's always, even if they don't beat us and shoot us with rubber bullets, there's always the threat of violence, right? Yesterday, they stood around, the National Guard stood around, and the county sheriff and LAPD all like locked arms and stood around being this kind of occupying force, daring us to do something, daring us to walk onto the steps of a hall of justice that we pay for, right? And so you, Kendrick, I want you to talk a little bit about the sacrifice that comes with protest, the sacrifice that comes with organizing, and what you endured, and just kind of the short version, because we want to also encourage people to drop questions in the comments, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible. We're having them put into the chat so that we can see them, and we'll be sure to lift up as many as possible. But Kendrick, I'd like you to speak a little bit to this idea that you can go out and protest and organize and think that there will be any costs.
Yeah, I mean, like I call it like the red carpet moments, but it's like red carpet with like extreme danger around. You know, it's like and to be frank, a lot of the time, you know, for anybody who's in Hollywood, those red carpets are protected by police a lot of the time, and we need to get them out of those events because we still feel we feel unsafe with police around. So um when they've proven several times this week when the cameras were rolling that they could allow us to protest and have a good time, lift up our demands, and say whatever the hell we want, like, because a few foul words or a lot of foul words, a lot of fucks and a lot of shits and a lot of dams ain't nothing in comparison to the violence that they enact on us every day, and these systems enact on us every day. And so when we talk about putting our bodies on the line, you see a lot of protests, and you don't see a lot of protests where we've marched thousands of folks or 20 folks or 10 folks down to wherever the target is that day, and nothing happens. Nothing happens, which proves that they can do it. But on Saturday, they decided to try to make an example of folks. They wanted to scare us back into our houses. And they didn't know that that at least my camera was gone. And that a lot of people were going to see it. And they saw what was happening around and decided, like, after such a beautiful, beautiful moment. And again, we had a very peaceful protest, but I'm not advocating for peaceful protests because we are facing violence. Even with, it's the same thing of like being Black in America and doing everything you possibly can to sound educated and look unthreatening and look non-threatening and look put together and as white as possible and sound white and look white and whatever the hell it is. You do everything you possibly can to be accepted by whiteness, and you're still criminalized. You still have to work 10 times harder. You're still not accepted. You're still Black. And so it's the same thing in protest. You can do all you want to be peaceful, and as you saw with the sit-ins and such in the 60s and 70s, it ain't no different now. You see people doing the same shit, sit-ins in the street with these fake ass curfews that they come up out of nowhere. Like, it's not a law, it's literally a policy that they decide one day. We got to know the difference between that. There's laws, there's policies. A lot of the laws are unjust already, but just to have this policy that you come up on the fly and say that people can't be up after 6 o'clock, can't be out after 6 o'clock, so you could suppress their right to protest, which is a fundamental right here, and then utilize that as an excuse to brutalize folks. And I'm talking about them shooting us with rubber bullets. I got hit 7 times, and those things, they try to say rubber bullets like it's a Nerf gun. These things hit you and they take off your skin. I have chunks of skin missing that I'm still healing from. It ain't scabbed up yet. They're fucked up. Now this one is a little bit better. And then my whole arm was swollen up. They beat us with batons and such. They split my assistant's shin open to where you could see his bone. They hit my boy in his skull. He had 2 fractured bones and a skin flap. And his name is Dion. And we have several different stories, and we coming after they ass for that shit. But that is a possibility at all times. But I want to highlight that is what we're thinking about danger and protesting. But for Black and brown folks, that's the danger every single day. When we say our existence is resistance, like, yes, us still here is our resistance, right? Us having joy and living our lives is resistance. But also every time we step outside of our house, we are resisting colonization. We are resisting the infrastructure that has been put in place to kill us. The systems that have been put in place to target us. And so that is our reality. Y'all just saw it on camera because they did not, it's been very clear when white folks show up with guns to the State House, they are met with peace, right? Their protests look much more violent than ours. They come ready and armed, right? And they are met with peace and patience. But Black folks protest with no weapons, right? Or people stand with Black folks, right? And protest their death and say Black Lives Matter, and they're brutalized. So, you know, that the fact is that this culture of America is anti-Black. It's inextricable. Capitalism is inextricable from anti-Blackness. The systems that have been put in place in this country that are operating today were formed to harm and target us, to protect the white folks that were enacting that harm and that genocide and that slavery and abuse and torture on our communities, on Black and Indigenous communities.
Where I saw it, I was still on mute, but now I'm not. Caught that myself. So we're gonna get to some of these questions, but before we do, Joseph, I'm wondering if just in a couple of minutes, you can encapsulate this step that we just took forward and how that happened, because Black Lives Matter and our allies won, I think, a pretty significant step forward. It's not a victory because we believe we're abolitionists. We believe in defunding the police. And until we can defund the police and usher in a world without them, we want officers to be held accountable in the killing of our people, and DAs who refuse to prosecute to also be held accountable by voting their ass out of office. So by Jackie Lacey. But can you talk about, just for viewers who might not be aware of what we just won and how we won it, can you give us like the 2-minute version of what just happened?
Well, I'm gonna withhold much of my feelings on that, Doc. I'll say this, I'll give it a caveat. Number one, the most major victory, and I will call this a victory, that we've had in this past, week, a little over a week, is people in the streets. Is people uprising and demanding justice and demanding change and demanding a new system. That is the most significant victory by far, I think. It's led to a number of other, I'm going to call them developments. Definitely, I'm not going to call them victories. But here in LA, what that looks like is that yesterday, again, after only a week or so of folks being in the streets, and a bit longer, right? We know that BLMLA has been calling for defunding the police budget for over 5 years now, right? And with People's Budget LA for quite a while this year, right? So we know that we've put on a campaign calling for defunding police, and that nobody responded, that the mayor didn't respond, that city council didn't respond. And now after 1 week, right, of folks showing up day in and day out to demand justice for George Floyd and also for all of our folks here in Los Angeles, the mayor yesterday announced, as we were protesting, that they were going to cut about $150 million from the Los Angeles Police Department and about $250 million or so overall from different departments, and put that towards Black and brown communities. Now, obviously, $150 million out of a $3 billion, I'll say that again, a $3 billion LAPD budget, right? $150 million is a drop in the bucket, right? But at the same time, we know that not even that would have happened without people in the streets, right? So this is, like, I'll say a development. I'll call it a development, a positive development, not a victory, right? And it means, number one, that our protests and that people being in the streets and demanding justice is working, right? That folks are being heard. And it also means if that's what we can get after only a week being out in the streets, then we need to stay our asses out in the streets and push for real transformative change that's much more than a drop in the bucket. Hope that was the update you wanted, Doc.
Yeah, Absolutely. And we have to be really clear that, and I'm going to say some of the things that you're holding back on. We want to be really clear about who's been out the streets, right? We want to be really clear that when we talk about the danger and the cost of protest, that we honor those who've been willing to pay those costs, because they got a lot of, what do we call them, free riders, right? Who attempt to say, oh, this is a movement where this is a moment where there's an opening, and so let me get in, right? And so we don't believe kneeling with police. You're talking about police kneeling. If a police officer kneels next to, well, I'm not say what I would do. No police officers will be kneeling next to me, period, right? Similarly, white supremacist terrorists like Donald Trump, or liberal white supremacists like Mayor Garcetti,
right,
whose budget, remember that this cut he's making is to his own damn budget, right? He's cutting his own budget, right? He could have just proposed that in the first place. So we had to fight to get him to do that. This is not what he believes in. This is very clear. So whether it be an officer attempting to kneel next to me, or a violent white supremacist uttering the name George Floyd, or a liberal white supremacist pretending to care about Black people, my prayer is this: every time you invoke that energy, you curse your damn self. You say, George Floyd, may he be visited upon you. And that's spiritual energy for real, because when we say the names of our people, they come and they see you. And so don't say the name George Floyd, because he's sitting there with Riddell Jones and he knows exactly who you are, Mayor Garcetti. So it's really important that we recognize that these people who see a moment to bring police and community together, right, in a time when we are advocating for abolition and the defunding of police, are really trying to advance themselves at the expense of community. And so I said way more than I probably should have, but I just want to lift that up. That people like Kendrick and Joseph and all of those who are out there at cost to themselves, whether it be beatings or I can't even tell you how many death threats I've gotten over the last couple of days, but it's been hell of them, right? There are costs. And so don't feel like you can hide back and sit back and ride on our work and then feel like you can go forward and somehow get some of the fruits of our labor. So I want to uplift that this step forward is a result of the work of Black Lives Matter. And so I've said too much, but you wanted to add something, Joseph, before we get to some of these viewer questions.
No, you got it, Doc.
Okay.
Hold it down.
So in the viewer questions, and I know Kendrick is going to probably go for this one. Do we trust protests that aren't from the BLM?
No. That's the short answer. No. Here's the thing. Y'all don't even much. Here's the real shit is y'all don't even know us and or Black Lives Matter. And they've been out there, we've been out there for 5 fucking years, and Black Lives Matter LA, a lot of people think that we just BldPwr and Black Lives Matter LA got together overnight and we're like, what would be a great idea if we just got a whole bunch of people out tomorrow. Let's get thousands out tomorrow. And we made some text messages and everybody came. It is years of work that led to that, and understanding safety precautions, relationships in the city, places in the city, escape routes, all kinds of things that you need to know when protesting. And so whatever y'all want to do, you do it at your own risk regardless, right? You ain't got to take my word for it. I'm just letting you know what it is. But, you know, people are, if you don't see it on Black Lives Matter social media, if you don't see it on BldPwr social media, it ain't us. We want to promote it because we want people to come. And we want people to know it's us. And if we have an action, a private action, you will still see us take claim of that shit. So it's not, you know, I don't, I am not going to lead anybody where I would not go. And if I don't trust those folks, and if Black Lives Matter is not working with those folks, they're not going to promote it. We're not going to promote it. But know that wherever you go, when you're protesting, especially in these times where they're calling out the National Guard and such, you are risking something. And you have to take as many precautions as you can. If you are undocumented, if you got warrants, you got kids, you gotta, you know, think about those precautions. And if you're not doing it with an organization that has experience in those protests, if this is just a few of your friends getting together, there are things that even experienced people forget. You know, so, and with the infrastructure in place, and everything around protests is about liberation and about safety of those folks, protecting your folks. So if you don't have experience in that, you might be forgetting some protections. So, and even with all the protections, you can still get hurt because police are terror, you know? And so, be very careful when going out there right now. You never know who's got what planned and what type of liaison they got with, you know, and or who's in, I don't know, who people got other motives, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add to what Kendrick's saying, that what we're saying is protest with people who you trust, right? Do not stage a one-person protest because the police are on one, right? You will get beat. You will get arrested. You will bear consequences that you may not want to bear, right? We're not saying that those things won't happen if you're with Black Lives Matter, but we try to remember to take necessary precautions. You'll always hear us issuing warnings like, don't give your number out to people who you just randomly met at a protest, because a lot of them people in that space are undercover cops, right? So those are the things that you'll kind of hear. We'll say that, you know, the official Black Lives Matter portion of this program is over. And we also want to be clear that we're not telling people not to do what they want to do. But we're saying that we're backing up now. And so once you hear that, then if you came to the rally, like the one that we did on 3rd and Fairfax, at that point I was there with 3 kids. It was time to go. It was time to go. And so those are the things that you can think about. Now, I know some of y'all are young and energetic, and I always say I don't give a fuck about going to jail and I'm not scared of shit, right? If that's how you feel and you want to put yourself on the line and you feel like there's something to be won by doing that, and that's always a thought. Is there something to be won? Don't just do it for your energy or for street cred to say, well, Kendrick got shot 7 times, I'm going to get shot 8. Right? I'm going to show my wounds on my social media. Don't do it for that. Is there a purpose in you doing that? Is there a purpose in you violating the curfew? If there is and you're willing, please do that if you think it's going to move us forward. But just to answer the question, we want you to protest with organizations and people that you trust. And I'm talking too long and it's 8 o'clock, but we started a couple minutes late. So if it's okay with JoJo and Kendrick, we'll go 5 more minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
And yeah, please.
So there's a question. I want this, huh?
I said, yeah, please don't go out there and get shot. Y'all,
Right.
those things are lethal, by the way. They can kill you.
Right. So there is a question about next steps? What do we do next? And I think that there's an answer around marching, and I'm going to give just, in fact, no, let Joseph go, and then I'll fill in any blanks. What do we do next? What's next up?
Yeah, just what y'all were both alluding to, right? To get plugged in and to organize with folks you trust, but to get plugged in with folks who are doing work on the ground. And there are a lot of organizations that have been doing work before, the last few days, right? We see a lot of BLM Instagram pages pop up that didn't exist 4 days ago, right? That's not the folks you necessarily want to go protest with, right? There are folks who have been doing this work. So get plugged in with an organization that is trusted in the community, right? And get plugged into the work. Because again, these protests are our show of power and our show of strength. But we have to sustain that long term, right? $200 or $250 million cut or $250 million diverted is great. It's a great first step, but we got to continue to keep pushing. And the only way we do that is if we keep up the pressure, not just in the streets, but also in a number of other ways. Pressuring our elected officials, making sure we get our community members involved, and we're starting to build these organizations, right? So, obviously our calls right now are 1, to prosecute killer cops, and 2, to defund the police. And so the ways that you can do that are by joining the organizations in LA that you see right now uplifting those calls, right? Obviously, Black Lives Matter is uplifting that. And there's a number of other organizations who have been joining the fight to defund the police and to prosecute killer cops. So get plugged in, do the work in your neighborhood, in your communities, have those conversations. I know some folks can't go out because it's COVID, because you're immunocompromised. There's so many other ways that you can contribute to these organizations and to the work. So plug in, use whatever talents, abilities, and resources that you have to support the movement.
And I'll just give some specific things that we can announce. That on Tuesday, every Tuesday, and this speaks to another question about people who are at home, who are immunocompromised or who are differently abled. That's okay. We need you, because all of these meetings are now online. Every Tuesday morning at 9:30, we need you to join us for the LA Police Commission meeting. We need you to make public comment. We need you to tell Chief Moore he gotta go, because we got a new hashtag, right? Defund the police, Jackie Lacey must go, but we all prosecute killer cops, but we also got a new one, fire Moore, right? Moore, right? You remember Chief Moore, LAPD Chief Moore actually said that protesters have George Floyd's blood on their hands, when this fool actually shot 2 people and killed 1, right? So he literally has blood on his hands, and he's going to try to indict the protesters. Oh, no, you got to go, Chief Moore. So please join us every Tuesday morning at 9:30. Watch this police commission that rubber stamps these terrible policies of LAPD. Every Tuesday night, we want you to join us online for the Torrance City Council meeting. And the reason we go to City Council in Torrance is Christopher DeAndre Mitchell was murdered within 15 seconds of their approach to his car. And so every single Tuesday night for now almost a year and a half, we have been going to the Torrance City Council meeting saying that the officers who murdered Christopher DeAndre Mitchell should be fired and prosecuted, and demanding a police oversight body or a civilian oversight body for the police. Leading that work is our beautiful, powerful sister, Sheila, and we want to uplift the name of her niece, Alicia Bates, who just died yesterday. And so, Sister Sheila, if you're watching, we haven't spoken with you today, but we want you to know that we love you and that we're saying the name Alicia Bates. Every Wednesday, so I probably should have announced this one before I moved forward. Every Wednesday, we're in front of Jackie Lacey's office in person. And we were trying to do it virtually, and that was all nice for a minute. But we back. We're in front of Jackie Lacey's office saying Jackie Lacey must go. And we're also saying that in between these protests, we need you to tell your people to vote her out of office. So those are 3 tangible things. And we're also asking you to continue to follow our social media, because we don't always announce some of the things we're going to do at all. And then some of the things we don't announce until right ahead of time, because we want to make sure that we're not caught up, right? Next question, maybe Joseph can quickly answer. This one is about how do we protect our babies and children during the protests. So you bring a lot of students deserve students out to protest. How do you go about ensuring that they're safe?
Man, it's just the same things we were saying earlier in terms of being vigilant, right? Don't leave your kids with nobody that you don't know or that you don't trust. We try to make sure that there's multiple folks who are responsible, right, for kids, especially if there's multiple kids, because in a crazy environment, or where there's a lot of people, rather, it's easy to get lost, right? So make sure that y'all have a system. Make sure that, especially if depending on how old they are, they better know your phone number, have it saved in their thing. But definitely the number one thing is just making sure that you are with trusted people, and that there are multiple eyes on children and youth at all times. We try to make it a priority at our actions to name that, right? To name that there are youth there, and to name that we're prioritizing the safety of youth. We know that some other folks don't do that, right? So being vigilant at all times, not trusting your kids with nobody else, making sure that, if teenagers are going, your teenage children or whatever, they're going together, they're going only to actions where who's putting it on, and you trust those people. And yeah, just making sure that they know all the protocol to stay safe for themselves, and to stay out of, situations that could get them caught up or hurt.
Right. And I'll just add, as a parent, have an action plan, right? What if you get snatched up at a protest, what happens to your kids? So always have an emergency plan. Be clear about who can take your kids if something happens to you. Where do they go if something happens to you? If they're back in school, who's authorized to pick them up from school? Have that emergency plan. And what I do is I have it in writing in multiple places. So I make sure that the people who can pick them up from school have something in writing in advance all the time that says they can pick the kids up. I also always have 1 or 2 people at the protest who know what to do if something happens to me. We are running out of time, and so I'm just gonna, there's a quick question. Are there Latinx groups that Black Lives Matter recommends? Our partner in Boyle Heights is Central CSO. We absolutely recommend working with them if you're in the Boyle Heights area. They are absolutely fantastic, founded and led by one of the most incredible organizers who's ever walked the face of this earth, Carlos Montes, who was one of the co-founders of the Brown Berets. And so Central CSO is one that we definitely get down with. For Indigenous people, we get down with the American Indian Movement. And so there's organizations that partner with us. And of course, for white folks, White People for Black Lives are our partners in most things. Let's quickly close out, because I'm keeping y'all beyond what I said. Kendrick, do you want to have the last word? Anything forgetting other than protest works? That's what we take in from it, right? Protest works, and BLM is at the forefront of this current protest, right? What else do we need to say?
I mean, nothing really. I'm looking at this tweet that somebody put out about LA County education having 500,000 students, just a good model to kind of look at what the money can do. LA County education has 500,000 students and a budget of about 7.5 billion, which amounts to about 15,000 per kid, which is not enough. About 15,000 per kid, right? That they spend, over that span of time, that is not nearly enough. And then LA County Police, and we know that some of those schools get less resources and such, right? So they spend even less per kid. LA County Police has 9,000 officers and an operating budget about 2 billion, right? 3 billion overall with pensions and such, but 2 billion, right? Which amounts to about $250,000 per cop. So you have 250,000 per cop. It just shows what they value. 15K per kid, 250,000 per cop, right? It shows what they value. And even if you look at that, if you look at that number split up, you can see that like that's $2 billion for 9,000 people, right? 9,000 employees. So 250 million that they're giving us for our communities that equal millions of folks ain't nearly enough. We need way more. We need to keep on fighting. We need to get out in these streets. It's just an example that when we fight, we win, right? Because they scared now. We got them by the cojones, you know what I'm saying? So we got a little attraction going on. But that is supposed to be, I just want to make sure that I frame this properly, that is supposed to be our encouragement to keep fighting, not our signal to be complacent. So let's keep getting back out in these streets. Let's keep organizing each other and protecting each other. And the only other thing I would ever make sure that I say, because one of my buddies showed up yesterday all by herself. Do not go to no protest by yourself, period. Do not go to a protest by yourself. Find other folks to come with, at least one person to come with, especially right now, because you don't know what's going to pop off, and somebody needs to know your information to know how to look for you. Cops be kidnapping people. When Melina was talking about people getting snatched up, she's talking about the cops snatching them up, all right? So be careful, y'all.
All right, any quick closing?
Love y'all. See y'all in the streets, man. See y'all in the streets.
Follow our social media. We are not done. As Kendrick said, that we are taking that step as a reason to stay in the streets. There will be more on our social media about the next things that you can do. Make sure that you bring a friend with you. Make sure you tune in every Thursday at 7 p.m. for This Is Not a Drill. As we close, I just want to thank Megan and Philip for the support, the tech support, and we will see you soon. Peace.
Peace.